Travel in comfort between the largest cities of Canada and the United States. Amtrak can take you from downtown Toronto to the heart of New York City. Along the way, cross the border at the famous Niagara Falls. This is the Maple Leaf.
Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new Trains Are Awesome video. I'm Tom and I am coming to you from Toronto, Ontario. Behind me is the CN Tower, of course built by the Canadian National Railroad, and I'm at Union Station about to travel back to the United States. I'm headed to New York City today. We're going to take a train from Canada's largest city to the largest city in the United States. That train, of course, is the Via/Amtrak Maple Leaf. I'm very excited. First time ever doing an international Amtrak trip. So without further ado, let's go. Here at Union Station, of course, you can transfer to GO commuter trains as well as the subway and the streetcar. I've got videos on all of those. Make sure to check them out.
Okay, so the video on Toronto subway is not done yet, but it's coming soon, so that's a good reason to subscribe if you haven't already. Anyway, the impressive building that forms the main hall of Toronto's Union Station opened in 1927. It is made of materials such as marble, limestone, and bronze. The main hall is where you will find the Via Rail ticket offices, baggage counter, business class lounge, and a departure screen. Via Rail is the main Canadian intercity train operator, kind of the Canadian Amtrak, if you will. Toronto is the biggest and busiest station in all of Canada. From here, you can take trains to places like Ottawa, Montreal, even Vancouver. Our train is operated as a Via train while it's in Canada, specifically train number 97. I saw some people lining up for train 97, so I figured I'd join the line. Thankfully, a Via Rail employee came to let me know that this line was for domestic passengers. People traveling across the border into the United States must wait in a special waiting area, where staff make sure that everybody has the right documents on them. There's separate lines for domestic and international passengers, so those of us going into the United States have to wait in this waiting room at Alcove D.
You can head on up. Thank you so much. My colleague is on the right. If you need the elevator, please let me know. We do have an elevator. This is for train 97 going to New York. Anybody crossing the border?
Up on the platform, our train to New York is waiting on the right. American viewers will immediately recognize this as an Amtrak train. Specifically, these are Amfleet 1 cars, built in the 1970s and 1980s by the Budd Company. Because the Maple Leaf is a daytime train, there are no sleeper cars. As is the case for coach class on most Amtrak trains, seats are first come, first served.
All right, we're on the train. It is an Amfleet 1, just like we have on my home route to the Northeast Regional. But what's special about this one is the entire car smells like pee.
You pick an empty seat you like, and it's yours for the journey. These Amfleet 1 seats are well padded, with a comfortable amount of legroom. They'll be perfect for the 12-hour journey. Additionally, there are power sockets in the wall, a tray table, and baggage racks above the seats. The generous recline that these seats provide is controlled using a button in the armrest. We've got a few minutes until departure, so it's the perfect opportunity to look outside and see some of the trains moving around Toronto's Union Station. Over there we have a GO Transit commuter train, and then on the track next to us something really cool shows up. It's the Via Rail Corridors J train. The J train is actually 2 combined trains that run from Toronto east towards Ottawa and Montreal. The 2 train sets are coupled until Brockville, Ontario, where the front of the train will go to Montreal and the back of the train will go to Ottawa. They're combined so that they only have to take up 1 slot on the busy line up until Brockville. Now the train in front uses LRC cars, which were built by Bombardier and are very similar to the Acela cars in the United States. The locomotive in the middle is the second train's locomotive, and then the cars behind it were built by the Budd Company in the 1940s. These are some of the oldest passenger rail cars you can ride anywhere in the world, and it was really cool to be able to see them up close. I hope I get a chance to go to Canada soon and ride them before they're gone. Soon it is 8:22. Just 2 minutes behind schedule, we begin to pull out of Toronto Union Station, marking the start of our 12-hour international journey to New York City.
Window here. So if we evacuate, we're going to use the doors at the back. We only use the windows if we direct you on the side that we direct you. Pull the red handle all the way off, pull a piece of glass out, climb out. Anyone following you, just direct them to a safe area away from the train. Any questions about this at all? Thank you very much.
That was interesting. It was like an emergency exit row speech on an airplane. I've never had one of those on an Amtrak train before. Well, technically, this is a VIA train. As we pass underneath the CN Tower, let me explain. You can book this train using the Amtrak website. That's what I did. I booked from Toronto to New York a little over a month in advance and ended up paying $178. So while you book it as one train, it technically operates as two trains. You can see this in my receipt. It was $63 to Niagara Falls, New York, and then $115 to New York City. You also received two tickets, one for train 7097 to Niagara Falls, and another for train 64 from Niagara to New York. Train 7097 is considered a Via Rail service, with Via Rail staff on board and everything, so be sure to show the conductor the first ticket. Anyway, we are now traveling southwest out of Toronto, hugging the shore of Lake Ontario. The tracks we are on belong to Metrolinx, the Ontario agency responsible for running GO Transit, among other things. Since it's the morning rush, a green and white GO train passes us every few minutes. We also run past a large Via Rail yard, where we see one of Via's brand new Siemens train sets that are used on corridor services. Beyond it, some older Via stock. I really do have to come back to Canada soon. There are currently 3 Amtrak train services that go to Canada. Obviously, there's the Maple Leaf, which we are on. Connecting New York with Montreal is the Adirondack, and out west, the Cascades runs between Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, British Columbia. Out of these 3, the Maple Leaf is the only one that is treated as a split train between Via and Amtrak. The other 2 are just treated fully as Amtrak trains. Border control is also different on all 3. On the Adirondack, it happens on board the train. On the Cascades, they do it at Vancouver Station, and on the Maple Leaf, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Alright, so we've just stopped at Oakville, which was our first stop, and it's really interesting because up until Niagara Falls, Ontario, this is basically just a Via train that looks like an Amtrak train. The announcements were in English and French, and they basically just were like, this is the Via train 97 to Niagara Falls. Oh, and by the way, it will become an Amtrak train. They didn't even mention New York, so super interesting. I think I'm about to check out the cafe car, which they call the Smart Car here, just to see if the selection is different than other Amtrak trains. In the cafe car, going to enjoy a Via Rail breakfast sandwich. Oh, I think it's on an English muffin. It's pretty good. Anyways, after stopping in Oakville and Aldershot, our train makes a sharp turn over Hamilton Harbor to travel in a southeastern direction. This is Bayview Junction. Over here, we are on tracks owned by Canadian National, and at Bayview Junction, 3 Canadian National lines and 1 CPKC line all come together. It is basically where freight trains from Chicago and New York meet to continue to Toronto. Using the bathroom in the cafe car because it's a little bit less stinky. We've got our signature blue toilet water.
Your attention please. For your information, we're stopped on the side of traffic with the coming freight train on our right.
So once we reach Niagara, they are actually going to just change the menu and make it an Amtrak menu. I just spent like 20 minutes talking to the crew. It's super nice. We just talked about trains the whole time. They're like, have you been on the Acela before? I'm like, actually. As we barrel through the beautiful orchards of Ontario's Niagara region, where fruits like grapes and peaches are grown, the attendant hands out customs forms for entering the US. So I fill mine out as we stop at Grimsby Station. The Maple Leaf is the only intercity train that runs on this line. However, 3 times a day, a GO Transit commuter train also runs between Toronto and Niagara Falls. The Maple Leaf does stop at Grimsby, but GO Transit doesn't. It's one of the only examples I can think of where there's a station skipped by commuter trains but served by intercity trains. There are plans to construct a commuter rail station somewhere here, but it seems plans are all they are at this point. And then our next station is St. Catharines. This is the largest city in the Canadian Niagara region and the 8th largest city in Ontario. Soon after St. Catharines, we cross over the Welland Canal, a canal that allows ships to go from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, avoiding the falls. This is your sign that we are soon approaching Niagara Falls, Ontario. By this point, we are no longer sharing these tracks with freight trains. All freight service has turned south to cross the border in Buffalo, but we will be crossing at the falls, which means make sure you have your customs form filled out, your passport ready, and your bags packed. If you are not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, you also need to apply for an I-94 arrival record online 7 days before crossing the border. I've attached a link to the Amtrak website in the description below, so see that for a full checklist of what you need. This is Niagara Falls, Ontario. Fun fact, this is the only city in all of Canada with a TGI Fridays. The train station is right on the Canadian side of the Whirlpool Rapids Bridge.
Alright, that was Niagara Falls, Ontario. We stopped there for about 10 minutes, and now we are on our way to our next stop, Niagara Falls, New York. We're going to cross the Niagara River, and since this train is headed to the United States, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol check will be across the river in the American station.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are departing for Canada, crossing the Niagara River right now, entering the United States. You'll be arriving at Niagara Falls, New York train station. We'll be doing a quick brake test when we arrive on the platform. Once that's complete, we get the okay from Border Patrol, then everyone will disembark. Once you're on the platform, it is Border Patrol show. Listen to their instructions as you go into customs. Be exiting the train. Customs house is towards the north side of the platform. That'll be towards the rear of the train. Again, folks, listen to Border Patrol's instructions when exiting the train onto the platform. We'll make an announcement when it's okay to disembark.
Well, this is the Niagara Falls, New York station. That took like 2 minutes. Am I in the United States yet? I don't know. I'm gonna stop filming.
So all the passengers walk down a corridor until you end up at a baggage security check, and you just have to put your bags through. I had a ton of Canadian candy and cookies and stuff in my bag to share with friends back home. The agent looked at me like, are you going to eat all that by yourself? But I think he was just judging me more than suspecting me of smuggling. Then you talk to an agent at a desk, stamp your passport, and you're good to go. There weren't any issues in this train. I overheard a couple of conversations with people that had to explain what their travel itinerary was, but these were very nice border agents, which is always a blessing. And then you have to wait in a room while other agents are sweeping the train, checking the nooks and crannies for potential smuggled goods.
And after about 10 minutes, I've made it through border control. I will say that it was less intimidating than it usually is at the airport. You just line up, you put your bag through the machine, they ask you what food you bring, and then you go to a counter, they look at your passport, they ask you what country you're from, where you live. In my case, she had to show my passport to her colleague to ask if it was okay. I have no idea what that's about. I've learned not to ask questions at border control. It never works out good for you. And then they're like, you're good to go. So now we're in the waiting room waiting for them to reopen the platform.
If you care about where you sit, make sure to hang out near the doors to the platform. When they announce boarding, it's basically a free-for-all. Why? Well, even though we're getting on the same train, we're also kind of not.
And now we're getting back on the train. We don't get our old seat back or anything. It's like you're boarding a new train. Made it back on the train. I chose a seat on the Hudson side this time.
So after border control has swept through the train, Amtrak staff takes over. The cafe is swapped for an American one, and when passengers are finally allowed back on the train, this has become a brand new train. No longer number 7097, this is now Amtrak number 64 to New York City. New train means new seats, and since you already had to bring all your stuff with you for border control, it's not a huge deal. It gave me a chance to sit in a car that did not stink as bad. By the way, if you're traveling in the opposite direction, you go through border control at Niagara Falls, Ontario. I believe this is done outside. An Amtrak conductor scans my second ticket, and from this point, we are running on tracks owned by American Freight Railroad, CSX. We share the route with the Amtrak Empire service all the way until New York City. The Maple Leaf is partially funded by the state of New York, just like the Empire service is. We run alongside the Niagara River for now. With how flat the landscape looks outside, it's almost hard to believe that we're so close to the largest waterfalls in North America. Our next station will be Buffalo Exchange Street, located in downtown Buffalo, second largest city in the state of New York. What a lovely location here underneath a freeway interchange. Very welcoming. Soon we reach a junction where our train joins the route of the Amtrak Lakeshore Limited, the overnight train from Chicago to New York and Boston, which means that it's time for our next stop, Buffalo Depew, which really should just be called Depew. It's not in Buffalo. But since the Lakeshore Limited doesn't go into downtown Buffalo like our train just did, Depew basically functions as that train's Buffalo station, and it's a suburban pickup station for us. When it opened in 1979, Depew Station Building was a trailer. They later built this little Amshack, but it's still very modest, which is depressing considering Buffalo's previous long-distance rail terminal
Was the impressive Buffalo Central Terminal.
Anyways, from this point, we are traveling straight east all the way to Albany, the capital of New York State. To Albany, it's 5.5 hours of, admittedly, not the most amazing scenery you'll ever see on an Amtrak train. It's not ugly by any means, especially once we start running along the Mohawk River. I do like those views. But if you've ever taken Amtrak out west, you will know about some of the breathtaking views over there. If you haven't, well, make sure to check out one of my many Amtrak trip reports after you finish this one. Who knows, maybe it'll inspire you. It's a relaxing ride though. I brought some reading material, some snacks, and it was mostly quiet, except for when the conductor forgot to close the door between our car and the locomotive. Oops. Now seems like a good time to talk about the history of the Maple Leaf. As you may know, Amtrak was founded in 1971 by Congress to take over passenger rail service from private companies. In many cases, when they took over a train service, they kept its name. Most names of Amtrak trains today are not original, but in fact, the names of famous passenger trains from a bygone era. The Maple Leaf is too, but sort of not really. There was a Maple Leaf train long ago. It was operated by the Lehigh Valley Railroad between 1937 and 1961. While the original Maple Leaf did run between New York and Toronto, on the US side, the route was completely different. It ran through New Jersey and Pennsylvania. After Niagara Falls, it took the Canadian National tracks, much like our train today. That train was abolished in 1961. But for the next few years, there was still one way to directly travel between New York and Toronto by train. The New York Central Railroad ran a train known as the Cleveland Limited from New York to Cleveland, and attached to this train, there were a few cars to Toronto. At Buffalo, they would be detached, and a railroad known as the Toronto, Hamilton, and Buffalo would then take them to Toronto. This used a different route through Ontario than the Maple Leaf does. That operation ceased in 1967. The New York Central, who had built the tracks that we are running on right now as their main line from New York to Chicago, merged with their arch rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad, in 1968, forming Penn Central. But Penn Central soon went bankrupt too. Conrail was then formed by the federal government to take over their lines and freight services. Amtrak had existed since 1971 as the passenger train operator, but back then, a direct New York to Toronto train was not yet in their portfolio. Passengers going to Toronto had to change trains at Buffalo. During the 70s, however, there was a direct New York to Detroit train that cut through southern Ontario, known as the Niagara Rainbow. We wouldn't get a Maple Leaf until 1981. On April 26th of that year, the Amtrak/Via Rail Maple Leaf made its debut. It has been running ever since, except for 2 years during the COVID-19 pandemic. From March 2020 to June 2022, the Maple Leaf only ran between New York and Niagara Falls without going into Canada. Now along the way, we stop at the stations of Rochester, Syracuse, Rome, Utica, and our next stop, Amsterdam.
Amtrak's trying to convince me that this is Amsterdam, but they can't fool me. Trust me, I'm an expert.
After Amsterdam, we continue to follow the Mohawk River until Schenectady. At Schenectady, our route joins with the other two New York State-sponsored Amtrak trains, the Adirondack and the Ethan Allen Express. Schenectady is only about 15 miles away from Albany, and the name is kind of an anglicized version of a Mohawk word that means beyond the pines. Beyond the pines is what the Mohawk called the land beyond Albany, hence Schenectady. It also means that we are approaching Albany, the only stop along the way where you can get out and stretch your legs. We just have to cross the Hudson River,
I mean, I'm on a 5 a.m. schedule.
and then past some Amtrak shops. Look, it's locomotives 109 and 110 attached to each other. You don't see that very often where the numbers match. And then we pass another locomotive, this time in a different livery, a preview of what's to come.
Alright, made it to Albany. Been on this train for 10 hours now, hopefully only about 2.5 left. We're swapping locomotives here because the P42 that's been pulling us not really supposed to go into Penn Station because of the diesel fuel. So we're swapping it for a locomotive that has a third rail shoe, and that lets it use electric power when it's in the tunnels underneath Manhattan. Pretty cool stuff. But it means we have about a half hour here. You know, I was really hoping to go to the cafe car before Albany because I kind of feel like there might be a lot of people that get on the train here. But unfortunately, they closed it like after Amsterdam until Albany. So I have to wait. It feels good to stretch my legs for a little bit though.
While we were waiting for our new locomotive to come, a different train showed up. This is the Lakeshore Limited, an overnight train from New York to Chicago. Up front, there's a P32 ACDM locomotive in its signature Empire Service livery. These locomotives are equipped with a third rail shoe. Here at Albany, it will detach from the Lakeshore Limited, and this section coming from New York will attach to the section that came from Boston. Then, both sections will be hauled as one combined train by a regular P42 DC locomotive all the way to Chicago. The P42 DC, of course, is the kind of locomotive that we just shed. And there goes our P42. And here comes our P32, ready to take us to New York City.
I do love that our new locomotive has the number 711. Makes me want to get a Slurpee.
All aboard, we are about to depart. If you don't want to watch the trains during the layover, you could also go up into the station building, visit the convenience store or the cafe, which is probably what I should have done, because I tried going to the cafe car again, but it was closed right around dinner time. Looks like I'll be enjoying these Hudson River views with just the snacks that I bought in Toronto, whatever's left of them. This is one of my absolute favorite stretches of tracks though. We hug the eastern shore of the Hudson River all the way down to the Big Apple. Our top speed even increases to 110 miles an hour at certain stretches. In 2023, I took the Hudson River Rail excursion, where we traveled along these very same tracks in a pair of luxurious historical rail cars from the New York Central. This is one of my favorite memories ever, and you can watch the video by clicking on the link. Remembering the past is fun, but it's important to acknowledge the present as well. The total route miles between Toronto and New York is 544, about 875 kilometers. Toronto is Canada's largest city, New York is the US's largest. The route is even relatively flat, but there's just one train a day. It's diesel, costs $178 and takes over 12 hours? That's kind of sad when you think about it. The distance between Paris and Marseille in France is only a little bit shorter. Marseille doesn't even have 1 million people living in it. Yet those trains take only 3 hours, there are dozens of them a day, and you can get them for fares as low as 16 euros. It's extra painful because Canada just this past week announced the construction of high-speed rail from Toronto to Quebec City. So if you show up to Toronto Union Station in the future, you might just get on the slow, rumbly Maple Leaf right next to a flashy bullet train. If you ask me, the Maple Leaf would be a perfect candidate for high-speed rail too. Two giant metropolises at either end, with important regional cities in between, on a route with dozens of flights a day? Come on. But will it ever happen? Well, I am somebody who checks the news almost compulsively, and let's just say recent events don't exactly boost my confidence about a lot of things, especially not rail in the US. A small consolation though, in just a few years, the Maple Leaf will be re-equipped with the brand new Aero cars that Amtrak has currently ordered and that Siemens is building, so at least by the end of the decade, hopefully you'll be able to get on a modern train. Don't get me wrong though, I had a great trip, and if you have the time, I highly recommend taking the Maple Leaf. Look at this, we even finished with a sunset and a rainbow. Okay, I can't guarantee that that'll happen on your trip, but what I can guarantee is that when it comes to Amtrak, the journey is just as important as the destination. You get to sit back in a comfy chair, relax, walk around whenever you want, get food from the cafe car, and see some views that you can only see from a train window. It is my absolute favorite way to travel. Now, you might have seen earlier we stopped at Poughkeepsie Station, now we're coming into Croton Harmon, and at this point we're sharing tracks with the Metro North Hudson Line, New York City's commuter rail service. This is the first time we're sharing tracks with commuter rail since we left Canada, over 9 hours ago. The George Washington Bridge, so hopefully it means only a few more minutes till we can get off.
and we arrived about 15 minutes early, so that's awesome. Gives me some time to grab something to eat before I head home to DC. All right, Maple Leaf, let's debrief. You know what? I had a great experience. I mean, this is what train travel is about, right? Going from the heart of the city to the heart of the city, and Maple Leaf definitely does that. It was a very pleasant trip. Friendly Canadian staff, good food in the Canadian dining car. I'm really glad that border control was super easy, and we were on time the whole way. I honestly can't believe it for like a 12 and a half hour trip. Also, you know, those Amfleet seats, perfectly comfortable, and it was kind of nice to be able to sit in 2 separate spots. Now, if I may be so bold as to make 1 or 2 tiny complaints, hear me out. For one, don't close the cafe car for like an hour and a half right around dinner time. That seems like not a good move. And second, Maple Leaf was a great experience, but when you think about it too deeply, how in some of the wealthiest countries in the world, the train traveling from 2 cities that large, that distance, and then it's a once daily diesel train that takes half the day. I don't know, maybe not the best look. Definitely try out the Maple Leaf for yourself. Let me know if you've had other experiences aboard international Amtrak trains. I love hearing your stories. My night is not over yet. I gotta get on a bus to DC now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.